Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond as well. Let's start the program with a run through the markets here for you. So there is talk of consolidation yet again in Kenya's telecommunications sector, with the second and the third player in that space, Airtel and Telkom, reported to be talks about merging. Now, we know both firms are losing money to the tune of tens of millions of dollars every year. We don't know the precise terms of this deal just yet. More on that later on in the program. Safaricom shares, though, they were up 4/10 today. Nigeria's main index back above a low hit on the 9th, but only just. With today's closing numbers, it's still shed over 30% in the last 12 months. Here's what's coming up tonight. Fuel prices more than double in Zimbabwe, and that has triggered countrywide riots. There's a storm in Somalia over plans to have a foreign national heading the country's central bank. And we'll explore why the UK Prime Minister is warning of paralysis ahead of a vote on Brexit. All that and more is coming up in the next 60 minutes. But let's start tonight in Zimbabwe, where protesters barricaded roads and burned tyres in a suburb of Harare after the country's energy regulator raised fuel prices by anywhere between 128% and 166%. Cash shortages have so far limited President Emerson Mnangagwa's efforts to decisively end a brutal, long-running economic crisis and win back investors who've been sidelined for years under his predecessor, Robert Gabriel Mugabe. Now, the announcement has caused extensive shock in a country where the unemployment rate is over 80%. Zimbabwe's Congress of Trade Unions called for a 3-day strike in response to this latest price hike. All right, then let's get you the latest details on this crisis in Zimbabwe. CGTN's Farai Mukutuya joins us now live from Harare. Farai, good to see you. Is the president going to continue with his 5-country tour, or will he return at some point to deal with the current crisis?
Well, Ramah, at this point, we have no indication that the president will cut short his visit. He just departed early Monday morning on this trip, which is also crucially important in the context of the challenges that you've spoken about. Zimbabwe facing a huge foreign currency deficit, trying to attract new investment and foreign capital into the country. And these countries that he's visiting, Russia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, as well as then going on to the World Economic Forum in Davos, those visits, those trips are seen as very strategic in terms of helping Zimbabwe to perhaps unlock some of that funding that it needs, to resuscitating some of the projects that may have stalled and that may be in the pipeline, and helping, restart this economy, rehabilitate the economy and get Zimbabwe out of some of the challenges that it's facing. So at this stage, no indication that he will cut short his trip, but we'll wait to see if there's any change to that. All right, then. So let's focus on this fuel price business. What reason did the regulator give for raising fuel prices by this magnitude, roughly 100%, 150% if we average it out, in one go, especially at a time when fuel prices, at least on the Brent side and the crude oil side, have been falling? What was the economic rationale for this? Well, Ramah, the announcement initially, before the regulator issued the circular and, put it in black and white, the announcement was made Saturday evening by President Mnangagwa. And, the reasons he gave for, effecting this price increase was, to deal with issues of abuse of this facility, illegal trade, arbitrage opportunities. Now, just to give you some background, at the old price, using the prevailing parallel market rate, a litre of fuel in Zimbabwe was cost less than 40 US cents. Now, that had created opportunities for people who were buying this fuel at that price, then selling it on the black market for $1 or more. Some people were actually taking it out of the country and selling it there. And so to eliminate and stamp out those arbitrage opportunities, to eliminate and stamp out a trade on the black market, but also to make players in the sector more viable, this increase was then effected, that jump of over 150%. But I think what's also important to note in effecting this price increase is that at the old price, the government was effectively subsidizing Zimbabwean motorists. At this new price, it's a more realistic think more market-linked price. And so government isn't subsidizing motorists anymore. Government can now save those funds that it was using to subsidize and allocate them elsewhere. So in that respect, that is the rationale. And if you look at it from that point of view, it does make sense. Perhaps not making a lot of sense to workers who are hard-pressed and are saying, look, you're effectively raising this price times 3. We expect prices of other things to go up by the same quantum, and that will burden them even further.
Indeed, of course, the inflation hit will not be a pleasant one to deal with. Let's move on to the currency side of it. The Finance Minister, he says that a new currency is going to come in 12 months. But given everything we discussed, the currencies, the cash shortage, the country's economic crisis, you've got less than a month of currency reserve in the country, the failure of the bond note program, why introduce a new currency at this point in time? And more importantly, how it's going to be paid for?
Well, Ramah, when he made that statement or mentioned that a new currency would be on its way in the next 12 months, he did say that, look, when you look at the need to put up forex reserves, we are in the process of doing that. We are on course to doing that. And he said, give us months and not years. And so we expect that there is a plan. Perhaps funds are being set aside, being mobilized, certainly through, government is now charging forex in US dollars for some imports. Certainly through, increased deliveries of some of its key minerals, gold and platinum. Perhaps it is looking to mobilize some of the revenues from there to set aside and put in place to be able to establish this currency. But I think, this push and this requirement to have Zimbabwe's own currency is also driven by the frustration that people have of the bond note, the rejection that people have of it. People don't want it. They want to see the back of it. But also the fact that Zimbabwe is facing, difficulties, challenges in mobilizing enough US dollars. And so to try and get around those challenges, to try and perhaps find a way out, its own currency would be effectively the best way to do that. And so I think that is where the minister is coming from. But I think, putting in place the structural and the economic fundamentals can be done. The biggest challenge, I think, that Professor Mthuli will face is winning the people's confidence, getting people to actually trust this new currency once it's there, and not still wanting to trade and store their value in US dollars. That, I think, will be the huge challenge that he faces, Ramah.
Indeed. One last question for you, Farai, and I know we've discussed this before. Past administrations have rejected this idea completely, but given the fact that this crisis just seems to be getting worse and worse and worse, is there a point where the Finance Ministry and the Reserve Bank will be more open to perhaps just saying, you know what, let's ignore the US dollar, let's drop the bond note idea, let's just adopt the rand as a means of easing this cash shortage, at least over the medium term? Or is this idea, especially since it implies giving up independent monetary policy for some time, is that too high a price to pay?
Well, Ramah, the great rand debate, as you say, it is a raging debate. And, depending on who you speak to, they think that it's the way to go. Others think not. The Finance Minister himself has said, look, we can't afford to go the rand route because in order to be able to bring in the rands and distribute them and to get them, in the system, to get people to start using them, we still need to buy those rands using US dollars. And so he's saying, let's just short circuit that and go straight to our own currency. I think proponents of adopting the rand say, look, South Africa is Zimbabwe's biggest trading partner, and so it makes sense to adopt that currency. But as you mentioned, there are regulatory issues. There is that giving up of monetary policy. There are requirements that Zimbabwe must meet to join the Rand Monetary Union, and one of them is to have your own currency. I think ultimately, I've spoken to economists to say, look, it doesn't matter which currency you choose to trade in or make your dominant currency. The most important thing is to be able to produce and export, because the more you export, the more currency you can generate. So make the money first. It doesn't matter what currency it is, but be in a position to be able to generate and make the money.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. That's Farai Mukhtar there live in Harare, Zimbabwe. Now, speaking of South Africa, the South Africa-based global internet and entertainment group Naspers has undertaken a secondary listing on a new online exchange in South Africa. It's called A2X. Now, that bourse went live at the end of December last year. Company sources say it will, however, retain its primary listing on the JSE. CGTN's Angela Kupler has the details.
The global player is also one of the world's largest technology investors and operates in 120 countries. It accounts for 22% of the JSE Top 40 index. And this new listing makes good business sense to the company and investors.
First of all, what we've seen is that obviously it reduces the direct cost of doing business. And this has a very positive impact on the price formation process. So there are big savings for the end investor, there's big savings for the broker, and in time what happens is it deepens liquidity pools in South Africa, so when the company goes to raise capital, they can do it at a lower cost of capital.
Brokers and institutional traders are interested in the second listing from a volume perspective.
You want to buy Naspers. The question now is, well, do you buy it on the JSE in your JSE broker account, or do you buy it on A2X? You're buying exactly the same thing. What matters to you is costs that you're going to be paying and the price that you're going to be paying. And if I can get a better deal on A2X for cost and or price, I'm buying it there.
The new exchange is starting to attract attention and institutional investors are taking notice.
So perhaps a bit of pressure from some of the larger institutional, because for them, 50 cents matters. You know, you're buying enough shares, buy 1 million shares, you save 50 cents on each. That's, you know, real money you're now actually looking at.
The secondary listing is seen as a market changer for A2X, which now represents companies with a total market capitalization of $142 billion.
It's a huge endorsement not only for A2X, but for the merits of a secondary listing that we bring. So we said earlier when Standard Bank listed, that was kind of like a tipping point, but Naspers really takes us to critical mass. It gives us 15 companies, of which 4 are in the top 40, and I think it really puts us on the map.
This secondary listing is great news for those investors who didn't get involved the first time around. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to East Africa now. Insurance uptake in Uganda is forecast to rise in 2019. Data from the country's Insurance Regulatory Authority does show a marginal increase in registrations for insurance policies in 2018. But insurance products and services are still out of reach for many a Ugandan. CGTN's Michael Baleke filed this report.
The road to selling insurance in Uganda may be a slow one, but insurers say it's on the up. They say it's ignorance that is holding them back.
We believe in tit for tat. I give you my money, I must get a service. So in instances where the service that I'm supposed to get, which is compensation, is likely to happen or not, they feel like they are being cheated. For instance, when he pays for the whole year, he doesn't fall sick.
According to brokers, the reason for low uptake is because many people do not value insurance, and creating awareness campaigns will be the key area of focus in 2019 to reach out to more people about insurance.
The more people who join insurance, the less the cost of insurance. Because if there are less losses, then the premium is lowered as the years progress.
Insurers are also looking to tap into the promising oil and gas business, the standard gauge railway, agriculture and life insurance to grow premiums.
The uptake of medical insurance has increased, and that to us addresses the needs of the ordinary Ugandans. Two, there is increased uptake of large infrastructure projects which really address the development of the country.
A new law which comes into effect this January will see providers improve their financial positions. This could speed up the process of claim settlement.
We have about 13 regulations which we are concluding, and these are going to drive the sector ahead. We are looking at a risk-based capital framework, which is making sure that all the companies are going to be more solid and more vibrant.
However, the increase in tax on insurance products and services, uncertainties stemming from the regional politics and fraud may affect the projected growth, a move likely to steer insurance companies towards a more affluent Ugandan middle class. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
All right, then, I'll run through some company news now. Let's start in East Africa. India's Bharti Airtel is in talks to buy Kenya's smallest, at the moment, telecoms operator, Telkom Kenya. London-based Helios Investment, which owns about 60% of the company, is looking to partly cash out of the investment it entered into in 2015. Airtel, on the other hand, is looking to create a much stronger challenger for the current market leader, Safaricom, which has about 2/3 market share. The two companies held talks last year, but the deal is expected to be wrapped up by the end of the first quarter. Elsewhere, EcoBank is not under investigation in Nigeria. That at least is according to Nedbank. which owns 21% of the Togo-based lender. Now, prices in shares did fall by about 4% in the wake of media reports that Nedbank's West African associate was subject to an investigation that in turn spooked investors. The report indicated the investigation was in relation to allegations that Ecobank had overstated the size of its balance sheet and its income statement by applying incorrect exchange rates. Further afield, Germany's Federal Motor Transport Authority is considering recalling 30,000 additional VW cars over the company's emissions scandal. Dieselgate is a gift that just keeps on giving, isn't it? The report comes after the authority opened an investigation into whether a software update for 1.2-litre engines for VW cars allowed them to effectively cheat emissions tests. The German car makers had to recall hundreds of thousands of cars since it admitted in 2015 to installing illegal software to cheat strict anti-pollution tests. And finally, Airbus has delivered 800 commercial aircraft to 93 customers in 2018, effectively setting a new company record. The company has increased the number of commercial aircraft deliveries by 11% compared to the previous record of 718 units set the year before in 2017. In the last 16 years, Airbus has steadily increased production year by year, with final assembly lines in Hamburg, Toulouse, Tianjin and Mobile, complemented by the addition of the A220 line in Mirabel in Canada in 2018. That's a run through your company headlines. It's time for a short break on the program. Here's what's coming up next. We look at the storm in Somalia over plans to have a foreign national run the country's central bank. And Kenya flower farm revenues hit new record levels. We'll explore that and plenty more when we come back.
Economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Naidoo. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Let's head over to Somalia now. Legislators will be debating who should take over the Central Bank of Somalia. It's reported that Somalia's federal government have been planning on hiring a British national to replace the lender's former head, Bashir Isse. Now, there's been an enormous dispute, apparently, between the president, Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed, and the premier, Hassan Ali Khair over the foreigners nomination. The parliamentary debate to omit Article 130 in the Constitution, which prohibits foreign nationals from running the central bank, was also cancelled, according to sources. The political disquiet is simmering within the government and public circles after the Premier had settled on a foreigner, apparently, for the top job at the central bank for the first time in the country's history. All right, then, so let's get more on this particular story. Abdulaziz Billow is in the seaside capital of Mogadishu. He joins us now live from there with more on this story. So, Abdulaziz, what do we know about this candidate? Do we know who they are? Do we know why they're being selected to be the next governor of the Central Bank of Somalia?
Well, Ramah, there's no official communication from the Ministry of Finance or the government, that is the Prime Minister or the President's office, regarding the possible likely candidate who is going to replace Bashir Isse as the next governor of the Central Bank of Somalia. But from close sources within the government and also from individuals who try to apply for that position, some senior economists here, they're saying that the government is looking this time round to hire a foreign national to replace Bashir Isse. And the foreign national in this question is an individual known as Nigel Roberts, a British national who is being perceived to have a vast experience in the financial sector, an agricultural economist, an individual who has worked with World Bank for many years. He's being said that he has experience of almost 40 years, and he has worked with the World Bank, especially in the East African region and Somalia in particular. When he was in East Africa, part of his jurisdiction was Somalia, Kenya, Uganda, and also Sudan. So it's not a new thing that it will become for Nigel Roberts. But the issue that created so much tension here in Somalia, including in Parliament, where there was heated debate today with members of Parliament, more than 158 supporting the government move to amend Article 130, as you have said there, that bars foreign nationals from seeking top offices here in the country. So the amendment was made, and the Mogadishu-based federal government is insisting that what they're looking for right now is not an individual who will be appointed based on clan-based power-sharing formula. That is what happens, Rama, to be precise. When a governor is being appointed, one of the criteria that the government has to look is if he falls under the clan-based power-sharing formula. So what Mogadishu is trying to look for right now is an experienced individual, one who will streamline the financial sector in various aspects, because the government plans on printing a new currency. They want an individual who can implement that issue. And also there is the issue of debt clearance. Mogadishu wants the international creditors to write off the debt, the $5.2 billion credit debt that is being owed by Somalia. So they are up to experience at this stage, and they're insisting that the issue is not about a Somali national. Many Somalis can fill that post, but what they're looking for right now is an experienced person, whether he's a foreigner or he's a local, but it's now still not confirmed, Rama.
All right, then. So the question here for the government is competence, not nationality. But walk us through the legal context for this, because Article 130 is one part of it. But are there any other laws in Somalia that essentially bar a foreign national from taking up a post like this? For instance, if I wanted to be your next central bank governor, what would stop me from applying for that post?
Well, Rama, the country has a draft constitution that still awaits a referendum for it to be ratified as a full constitution. So that draft document is what is governing Somalia since 2012, when Somalia was in transition and progressing towards federal authority, where federal member states are part of the federal system. So that issue of an individual who is a foreigner who cannot vie for any office, that thing has been there for many years. It has been part of the Somali tradition and history. So that is one thing that opponents to this new amendment are arguing, is that there is no time that a foreigner was given such a high level clearance, such a high level position in the government. And they're saying that why is the constitution being amended specifically to please the interests of a foreigner, an individual in this case, yet alone there are many Somalis who can fill this position. So there's no exact clear law other than Article 130 that bars anyone from vying for that position of the central bank. And it's not just an issue of nationality, because Bashir Isse holds a dual nationality. He's Somali, but he also holds a Swedish nationality. So there's no conflict of interest in that case because he was a Somali, according to opponents. But the supporters of this move are arguing that at this stage in time, Somalia, what it wants is to please the donor community, to show the donor community that it has begun in the process of rebuilding the country. And one of the requirements is to have clear financial policies, one that can be able to the donor community can be convinced that the government has checks and balance in terms of the financial aspect. So there's clearly no any other law other than Article 130 which has been amended at this stage, but also there's no clear indication whether a foreigner will be appointed to this position. What the government is saying is that since this advertisement was placed on many platforms, including the Economist website, they're saying that this is an open challenge. They want the best individual to lead the central bank at this stage.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Bulletin live in Mogadishu. Thank you very much. Now, we're still in Somalia. The country hosted an award ceremony to honour the country's most successful firms. The event aims to boost investor confidence, but also to encourage local companies in the war-torn state. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo was there. He filed this report.
The annual Business Awards, now in its third year, attracted close to 90 businesses from various fields, including telecommunications sector, banking, as well as small and medium enterprises. Organizers say the event is meant to boost investor confidence and encourage local companies. Companies were awarded based on leadership, human resource practices, technology, and corporate social responsibility. Sultan Amri is a business consultant from Kenya and says the private sector in Somalia has flourished despite major setbacks, but more must be done to support the sector.
They can take risk, which is a very important quality of business. They are natural traders, okay? So if they get help in terms of organizing the business, then they can do very well. One of their greatest challenge is many of their business are informal. But if they organize and start proper business processes, systems, there's a possibility that they can be stable and the business shelf life will increase.
House Petroleum was awarded as the overall best company in the country. The leading oil marketer has expanded beyond the East African market into the Southern African region.
One of the richest persons in Uganda is Somalia, Mandela. If you go to Tanzania, if you go to Mozambique, if you go to South Africa, so wherever they are, they have that mantle of taking risk. They have that capacity of get going.
A leading software and technology company was also awarded as the best marketing company of the year. Its chief executive officer has also pioneered to set up an all-female center to empower female graduates venture into innovation and technology.
We won the Best Marketing Award this year. We did not win in the two previous Saba Awards, but our recognition today is a clear sign of our growth and future potential.
Decades-long conflict in this country has had a heavy toll on the Somali economy, but it is the private sector that continues to play a pivotal role in strengthening the country's economy that has in recent years begun to show tremendous progress.
The government acknowledges the role played by the business community, an important one that has ensured the survival of the economy. We hope to create a conducive working environment for our traders and encourage investors and create markers for our exports.
Stability in the Horn of African nation has also seen a return of major international airlines back to the Mogadishu route. Last year, the continent's biggest carrier resumed flights to Somalia for the first time in 4 decades. Global shipping companies like Maersk Line have also expressed interest in operations in Mogadishu, the latest in a sign of a changing business environment. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Over in Kenya, the horticultural sector had a pretty good performance in 2018. The latest industry data shows that Kenya earned $1.25 billion in 10 months. Those earnings in the year to October, however, also surpassed full-year results in the previous 3 years. Stakeholders have attributed the high earnings to the high standards of flowers, which have seen the demand go up in the world market. The sector is also waiting to reap the benefits of direct flights between Nairobi, Kenya's capital, and New York. On paper, that should give Kenyan produce direct access to the biggest economy in the world. Kenya Airways started direct flights to the US in October 2018, but it's yet to launch a dedicated cargo flight on that route. Still on agriculture, Tunisian analysts say that agriculture, which is a vital element of its economy, was hit by an unprecedented crisis since the 2011 unrest. Now, in addition to that, real estate development is the second most affected sector by the crisis. The alarming situation has caused fury in Tunisia as people can no longer find some necessary products. In addition, some analysts believe it's no longer safe to invest in real estate, which was at the time the most lucrative investment in 2010. CGTN's Adin Chouachi filed this report from Tunis.
Over the past 8 years, angry farmers have staged many sit-ins and mass protests across the country to denounce their difficult situation, which has worsened since 2011. A crisis hit the sectors of meat, milk, egg, fruit and other agricultural produce. Protests continue as the country marks the 8th anniversary of the Tunisian Revolution.
Farmers have been neglected by the state. Farm bankruptcies are on the rise in 8 years. We are desperate. State subsidies are rare. Everything is more expensive in Tunisia, while farmers are impoverished. The situation is unbearable.
Experts assert that the real estate is also one of the most affected sectors by the economic crisis. Some 100 property developers have not sold a single unit in 2018. They have been calling on the government and parliament to reduce the value-added tax, which increased from 1 to 13% in the 2018 state budget.
The high VAT has paralyzed the real estate sector. The middle class's purchasing power is weak. It has plunged to alarming levels since 2011. Taxes have increased, the construction costs skyrocketed, and customers can no longer afford to buy small units. This housing crisis is unprecedented.
Tunisia's consumer defense organizations urge the authorities to intervene to find solutions to the crisis in the agriculture and real estate sectors. Experts believe that the middle class is slowly disappearing in the North African state.
Consumers and ordinary people are the ones paying a heavy price for the crisis which hit the economy since 2011. The government must act to stop this scourge. Otherwise, the situation will not improve in 2019.
Following a wave of protests by farmers and real estate developers, the Ministries of Agriculture, Trade and Finance called for dialogue. They have promised to find solutions in consultation with the syndicates and the professionals.
According to the National Institute of Statistics, farmers, real estate developers and construction professionals are the main victims of the socio-economic crisis which hit Tunisia since the 2011 unrest. The country's premier has recently called on citizens to work harder and to make more concessions in order to turn the page on 8 years of economic difficulties. Adin Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Political tensions in the Democratic Republic of Congo have affected many businesses as the country with their gears up for a political transition. Fears of post-election violence are scaring away investors and local traders. The Congolese franc, in fact, has also dropped its value significantly against the American dollar. CGTN's Chris Chamringa is there who filed this report.
Daya Janin sells phones and other electronic accessories in the DRC capital, Kinshasa. Her business has been slow since last year's election due to the political uncertainty. She closed her shop 2 days ago following fears of widespread protests in the capital over the election's outcome.
People feared violence eruption. They were saying there's going to be shooting and that things would be bad. Chinese and Indian traders closed their shops and went to Congo-Brazzaville.
Other phone dealers have also been affected by the adverse impact of the DRC election.
After the elections, there was a lot of fear of chaos. We have not sold our products and very little money is in circulation.
Business was also affected by the government's decision to shut down the internet and texting services. But Thursday's announcement of Felix Tshisekedi as the winner of the elections has somewhat calmed tensions.
Many businesses in Kinshasa were closed over the past 3 days, fearing an outbreak of violence over the outcome of the presidential elections. But the situation is now returning back to normal.
The World Bank projected the DRC's economy to grow by 3.8% this year. But that target is unlikely to be met with the kind of tensions the elections has caused. But Congolese traders like Daya Janine are optimistic that the economy will bounce back now that a new leader has been declared. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
It's time for another break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. The United Kingdom's Prime Minister is warning of paralysis ahead of a vote on her Brexit deal. And we'll look at the latest Chinese trade data. Import and export volumes have hit new highs. All that and more is coming up shortly.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You see, we have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back. Let's run through the stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in Zimbabwe, protesters barricaded roads and burned tires in a suburb of the capital, Harare, after the country's energy regulator raised fuel prices by between 128% and 166%. Now, that announcement has caused extensive shock in a country where the unemployment rate is over 80%. Zimbabwe's Congress of Trade Unions called for a 3-day strike in response to that price hike. Over in Sudan, President Omar Hassan al-Bashir has reiterated he will not be stepping down even after weeks of violent protests. He has challenged his opponents instead to beat him at the ballot box in elections due in 2020. He's also blamed unnamed foreign powers for stoking unrest. Protests have rippled across Sudan since December, when crowds took to the streets in towns and villages against the government's decision to raise the price of bread. Still in the Horn of Africa, the Ethiopian Defence Forces have reportedly conducted airstrikes in western Oromia against the military camps of the Oromo Liberation Front. This comes in the wake of information linking ex-rebel OLF forces to criminal acts that include killings and robbery in the area. The airstrikes were conducted for most of Sunday. They're targeting training camps for the most part. Sources in the Ethiopian Defence Forces have confirmed the areas located in Welega, which is inside the Oromia region, was among the ones targeted. And finally, in Nigeria, as many as 8 million registered voters are at risk of not being able to cast their votes in the upcoming elections next month. The country's electoral body, that's the Independent National Electoral Commission, has been unable to distribute voter cards to all eligible citizens. During the last general election in 2015, only 45 million out of a total of 68 million registered voters collected their cards. Poor distribution of the cards could make a big difference to the electoral outcome. That's a run through your headlines. Right, then a bit of data for you now. China's foreign trade growth did continue in 2018. Now, the data does represent a minor victory 2 weeks into a year that economists, let's be honest, didn't really have very high hopes for.
While questions remain over what 2019 will bring for the global economy, China's foreign trade figures are continuing their steady climb. Li Kuiwen, a spokesman for the country's customs authority, says China's increasingly diverse trading partners are partly to thank.
While maintaining good growth rates with traditional trading partners, we are also actively expanding economic and trade exchanges with other countries and regions around the world.
Private sector trade saw increases in both volume and proportion. Last year, the trade volume of China's private enterprises reached nearly $1.8 trillion, accounting for almost 40% of the country's total. China's trade with the United States reached a critical juncture in 2018. Beijing saw its trade surplus with the country grow to 17.2%. And while many of the key questions in that critical commercial relationship have been resolved, Li insists the unsteady international environment could still pose a threat to economic health.
In some countries, protectionism and unilateralism are on the rise. World economic growth may slow down. Cross-border trade and investment may be dragged down.
Already, major international organizations have begun lowering their forecasts for global growth rates. The World Bank recently trimmed its predictions for global economic growth in 2019 from 3% to 2.9%. Another sign that uncertainty could imperil an otherwise steady ship.
The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or the AIIB, now has 93 members around the world from 57 at launch 3 years ago. CGTN's Zoyun sat down with the AIIB president to discuss the bank's track record so far.
3 years into operation, I think the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank has achieved quite a lot. First of all, we have all the major policies approved by the board, which can guide the management and the staff in undertaking our business. Secondly, as you see, we have recruited professionals from across the world over the last 3 years. We were not in a rush. We tried to make sure that only experts, professionals of highest possible caliber could be recruited by this institution. We now have roughly 200 people, and coming from more than 40 countries. So it's truly a team of international experts. And thirdly, the lending program has been rolling out. By the end of the third year, we have approved by the board $7.5 billion of lending program, leveraging a total investment in infrastructure and other productive sectors by the order of $40 billion US. Basically, I would say we have something to speak about over the last 3 years. But I want to highlight the point that all this is the credit to the major shareholders, to the board, and certainly to the commitment and dedication of the staff of this institution.
Well, Mr. Jing, we know when the bank was first established, it has only about 15 member countries. And now, after 3 years of development, it has evolved into a bank of nearly 100 member countries. So what do you think that made the bank so attractive for those countries to join? And what about those big ones like Japan and the United States? Have they expressed any interest to join the bank in the near future?
Over the last 3 years, we maintain the principle high standard, transparency, and we think it's important to run this bank as an institution, a multilateral development institution with 21st century governance. So more and more countries are attracted to this institution, believing that AIIB can implement the mission of improving regional and international cooperation, strengthening connectivity, and paving the path for sustained economic development and social development. So we now have 93. All this indicates a vote of confidence in this bank, initiated by China, but supported by all of the member countries. So I tend to say this bank was born with a birthmark of China. It's being brought up in the international family. With regard to the United States or Japan and a few other countries which are not members, my position has been very much consistent, because whether to join or not is the decision of any sovereign government.
All right, then let's look at the business of vehicles. The General Motors CEO, Mary Barra, is maintaining essentially that the decision made last November to shut down 5 assembly plants in North America is an important step to keep General Motors competitive. Mary Barra also hopes that the trade disputes between China and the US will be soon resolved. CGTN's Dan Williams filed this report from Detroit.
Cadillac was the quickest car maker out of the blocks in unveiling a new vehicle at the North American International Auto Show. The company hopes this SUV, the XT6, will help increase market share. But despite the glitz and a buoyant market, a cloud hangs over the US auto industry. Cadillac is a division of General Motors. In November last year, GM announced they would be closing 5 assembly plants in North America. A decision GM maintains is right for the company.
One of the things that we're looking at is making sure General Motors is strong for the future. We employ over 100,000 people in the United States alone, so it's important that we have a strong company, but we are working very hard, and we have job opportunities for all the impacted employees, and we're already moving many of them.
Although the focus for now is on this SUV, Cadillac is set to lead GM's electric vehicle charge. The company will soon look to compete against luxury electric automakers such as Tesla, Mercedes-Benz and BMW. That, they say, is one of the reasons the company is taking the step in closing plants now.
The way I think about what's going on right now is it's kind of a shift or a remix of our business, right? We've done this transformation to prepare ourselves for an electric future, Cadillac and beyond. So that's always a from and a to. And there's going to be dislocation and adaptation as you go through that process.
Another issue for car makers is tariffs. Automakers find themselves in the middle of the trade dispute between the US and China. GM's CEO, Mary Barra, is hopeful that will soon be resolved.
Both countries and their leadership are working constructively. They've had good conversation. They've got more planned. And we believe
A fear that some of the event's shine has also been lost, with the likes of Audi, BMW and Mercedes all deciding to skip the event this year.
Organisers are attempting to change with the times. The show will move to June next year in the hope that a summer date will allow car makers the chance to better utilise public spaces and provide a more exciting experience for the public.
It would appear that across the board, the auto industry faces a number of challenges in the coming months and years. Dan Williams, CGTN, Detroit.
Now, the UK's Prime Minister Theresa May has warned that the UK's planned exit from the EU could be derailed. Speaking to supporters in central England, she argued that lawmakers blocking Brexit altogether was now a much more likely outcome than the UK leaving without a deal with the EU. Now, the fate of the United Kingdom's March 29th exit from the European Union is deeply uncertain, as Parliament is likely to reject Mrs May's deal on Tuesday evening. As part of the effort to get the deal approved by the British Parliament, the EU has set out some assurances in a choreographed exchange of letters on Monday. Brussels, however, has repeatedly said the deal itself cannot be renegotiated.
The only ways to guarantee we do not leave without a deal are to abandon Brexit, betraying the vote of the British people, or to leave with a deal. And the only deal on the table is the one MPs will vote on tomorrow night. You can take no deal off the table by voting for that deal. And if no deal is as bad as you believe it is, it will be the height of recklessness to do anything else. But while no deal remains a serious risk, having observed events at Westminster over the last 7 days, it's now my judgment that the more likely outcome is a paralysis in Parliament that risks there being no Brexit.
Now, a survey from the business group CBI and PricewaterhouseCoopers shows that the uncertainty over Brexit and the economy has affected the UK's financial services sector. It shrank for the first time in 5 years. Profitability in the sector is also flat for the third quarter in a row in the 3 months to December. The survey of 84 companies said demand was expected to continue falling during the quarter through to March, with profitability likely to drop for the first time in about 3 years. The survey also found a striking loss of momentum at investment managers. They reported the steepest fall in activity since the financial crisis a decade ago, actually slightly more than a decade now. It's 2019. Investment management firms surveyed were less than optimistic about their prospects in coming months, with business from overseas customers taking a particular hit. All right, then, let's make a quick run through commodity prices here for you. A focus on coffee to start with. Not doing particularly well in the last 12 months. Today's 1.49% fall brings the year-to-date position on that particular contract out about 23.9%, or rather 12-month position, my bad. Brent crude back under $60 a barrel at 16.34 GM2 at $59.93 a barrel. To give you a sense of the lag time that economies here often face in changing oil prices, look no further than Kenya. It revised fuel price caps today. It lowered retail prices by just under 12% to about $1.02 a litre. Here's what's coming up next. Ethiopia's organic gold is losing its shine as global prices fall. We'll have that story shortly.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore.
Welcome back to the program. Now, a slump in global prices has taken coffee prices to levels not seen in nearly 13 years. In September 2018, the price of a kilogram of Arabica was down to just over $2 per kilogram. But those are prices we've not seen since December 2005, and it's less than a third of the peak we saw in 2011. Now, these low prices are raising questions about whether it's actually worth it growing coffee in traditional producers like Ethiopia.
In the highlands of Ethiopia, coffee farmers are seriously thinking about calling time on an industry that has sustained families for generations. Unlike producers of commodities such as oil and natural gas, coffee farmers have long suffered from being at the wrong end of the value chain, receiving only a small fraction of the retail price of their crop.
The price of coffee has certainly gone down. However, we cannot stop growing coffee just because the price has gone down. We are not going to be lazy. Even the price of gold fluctuates on the international market, let alone coffee. It will go up at some point and then down at some point. That is just how coffee prices behave.
Over the past year, the amount farmers get for a kilogram of coffee beans has fallen by a third to just 29 cents, reducing their income from a cappuccino sold in the West for $3 to $4 to under a cent.
There is a heavy dissatisfaction among the farmers. They complain that they are not being fairly compensated for their effort. The price of maize today is 10 birr, while coffee is 10 birr. Coffee is being sold at a price lower than the maize. This is why the farmers are complaining and they are worried about the future.
If the price of coffee continues to fall like this, the situation will force the farmer to consider changing to growing other crops. So far, they have not done that because the government is subsidizing them by making different contributions, such as supplying coffee trees and providing training. We also tell them the future is bright. However, it has heavily affected the farmers' lives because the cost of living and their revenue is not matching at all.
But at the other end of the chain, coffee has never been hotter. Millennials in the West who grew up with Starbucks drink lots of coffee and have fueled a proliferation of coffee shops as well as innovations from cold brew to nitrogen coffee. The industry has also seen a wave of acquisitions as companies such as Nestle, GAB Holdings and Coca-Cola spend billions to boost their market share. For struggling farmers though, times are tough. Growers around the world have warned coffee company executives in the West of a growing social catastrophe unless they can help to raise farmers' incomes. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
And finally, in South Africa, a craft brewery over there has launched the continent's first lager that also happens to contain marijuana. Now, marijuana was legalized for private use in the country just last year.
The lager is named after Durban Poison, a popular strain of marijuana known around the world for its distinctive smell and relatively short flowering period. Poison City Brewing was launched in 2015 and produces 5 different beers, including its latest brand, Durban Poison Cannabis Lager.
Easiest route into the market was to go with beer. And an interesting part there is that in beer, there's an ingredient called hops, which most people know about.